Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Professor Thomas DeLong. Professor DeLong teaches management practices in the Organizational Behavior Department at Harvard Business School. He's an expert in leader development, organizational, and career transformation. Today, we will speak about his latest book, Teaching by Heart, One Professor's Journey to Inspire. Professor DeLong, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my privilege, Alain. Thank you for the invitation.
So I was reading your book, and this is, in fact, the first book that I read about the journey of a professor in his field of expertise. I have spoken to many professors but about the topic of their book, but you go into your own personal life, and it's very nice to see all the fears, insecurities, and ambition that a professor goes through while developing his career. So that's the one thing that I find unique about your book. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background. I read in your book that you were inspired by your history teacher. Can you take us back to that time period where you were just taking classes and analyzing what's the thing that differentiates a good professor from a not so good professor?
I never understood the concept of flow. It was created by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi about this notion about having your world slow down and almost being hypnotized in the moment. And I just think as a little kid, I used to notice teachers that where I didn't want the class to end. And I think right from the very beginning, I was an observer, and I think I also saw. I saw systems, I saw how things related to other things. And then when I'm in a master's degree program, Stephen Covey, who is a noted teacher, asked me to be his teaching assistant. And I used to watch him connect with people, hundreds of people. And I call it this feeling, Alain. It's when everyone in the audience is experiencing the same breath. And I watched Covey do this, and I was intrigued by it. And I've always loved the teaching process. And so when as a graduate student at Purdue, at MIT, wherever I went, I was as interested in the process because I kept saying to myself, Elaine, I can't waste anyone else's time.
Right.
And if for her to sit there and have her mind and have her anxious because she feels like her time is being wasted, I said, I don't want that to happen regardless of how many students I have. So again, so I began teaching again in mid-1977, 78, and have continued now, and here we are at 2021. It's so interesting what you brought up, that you pointed out, and it has happened so many times, that I have faculty, professors, and teachers write me, and they say, what got into you that you shared your anxieties? You're supposed, and then they tease me a bit. They go, you're not supposed to tell all the secrets about how we feel inside. And I write them back, and I tell them that I guess it's just because I'm psychologically flawed. But
this is how people connect with you. I mean, we all suffer the same anxieties, no matter where we are, whether we are a beginner worker, or if we are the CEO of a corporation. We all have all the same anxieties, insecurity, fears.
And so I think I started as a younger professor at Brigham Young University. And I also tried to do this in a crazy way. My story is so crazy because I met the president of Morgan Stanley on an airplane. And he asked me to join the operating committee of Morgan Stanley and to be the first social scientist to try to transform an organization in Wall Street. And all when I was in meetings, and when I'm with students in classrooms, I'm always thinking this, and that is whose needs am I meeting? Whose needs am I meeting? Am I interested in how I look, how I'm sounding? Uh, am I being distracted? What I'm more interested in is what's happening inside that other person. And for example, Elaine, what I'm most interested in is that through our interactions, that you have a different kind of experience because you had an experience with me. And I feel that way with every teacher, for every student. I want students and I want professionals and other faculty to experience themselves differently because they've had an interaction with me. And that is, to me, that's the effort that I'm trying to bring teaching from a science to a craft to an art. And I can't do that if I'm obsessed about myself.
Right. Okay. It is an art indeed, because the same material can be taught by two different professors, and in one classroom, the students will be uh, trans transformed, and in the
Yeah.
other class, the students will be checking their phones. So, but let me ask you, at what moment in your life did you decide that you wanted to be a teacher, and what was that trigger point?
Well, I think really in the university when I was a freshman and sophomore, and I saw the wide variance in the quality of teaching. And I was really intrigued with that. And then I had opportunities to teach in various situations. And somehow I got the feedback that I was able to connect with people. And so then I went up through my training, way too many years of training. And then I said, well, this is great. I love what I'm doing. Now, then I said, what about the connection between leading and teaching? And so then when I went to Morgan Stanley, I started to see the very the the deep connection between what I saw as effective leaders and ineffective leaders, and it related to how they taught other people. But it was early on. I was 22 or 23 when I said, not only do I love teaching, but I love the atmosphere of a university.
Right. Okay. And what when you are a beginner teacher, you, as you mentioned, you are self-conscious. You are trying to figure out what is in the mind of your students, whether you are looking good to them or not. So you are self-absorbed. And at a given moment, you stop being self-absorbed and started focusing on the message, on the student itself as opposed to on you. So was there a moment in your teaching career when you discovered that
Yeah.
transformation?
Well, I think when a teacher uh, knew my name and talked with me before class, I said that made me feel different. That made me feel different. And I think that what I do, even to this day, I always come to class very early. And it's one of the ways I deal with my nerves. I come early because I want to start to focus on the students and I want to start to experience them as opposed to focusing on do I have my boards right? Do I have all the assignments out? All of those kinds of things. I want to be able to focus on that other person and and focus on what I think they might need as opposed to what I might need.
Can you share some examples of teachers who are transforming the life of students by engaging them so much into the subjects that they build amazing careers, and maybe teachers that are not inspiring, and maybe the student just doesn't continue
Right.
in that field?
Well, actually, the litmus test for me whenever I'm observing another teacher is who's winning, their cell phones or the teacher?
Hmm.
And when I'm teaching in front of a large audience, rather than telling people, well, I want you to put your cell phones away, I say to myself, I better be effective because I'm competing against their cell phones. I'm competing against their cell phones. And I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, that they're looking up. Now, this is what I teach new faculty. And I think about myself. I say, new faculty, you need to focus on knowing the content. That's the knowing. You need to focus on the doing, all right, how you're going to teach. But most important, and that you forget, teachers, is the being. The being. In other words, what kind of a person are you? And one of the big problems I saw on Wall Street was that people knew a lot, they're brilliant, and they did a lot and made a lot of money, but they may not have been the kind of individuals that we would aspire to be. And so one of the things I try to teach our MBA students is that you can't keep working 100-hour work weeks. You need to work smarter. And one of the ways to work smarter is to be congruent with what your values are. And once you start to say one thing and do another, then your credibility is gone. And students at all levels are trying to rationalize between what they see and what they feel and what they're experiencing. And so I'm just simply looking for some congruence around that. And I mean, I can name myriad of teachers in my own life, but I'm interested in, if I were to hire a new teacher, an elementary school teacher or at the Harvard Business School, I would try to figure out, is this person self-aware? Do they know their insecurities? Do they know when they get frightened? I want to know what kind of people give them a response where they start to be angry. So I want to see if they know themselves. What are your patterns? I ask them, what are your patterns? And if someone says, well, I don't know what that means, and I'll say something like this, Elaine, I'll say, who are the people that day in and day out make you nervous? Who are the people that you have biases towards? What is your attitude towards gender? And I want to know how they think about that. I'm fascinated with what is that. For example, I have a pattern, Elaine, and you can laugh if you wish, or you probably read about it. And that is that I kind of live my life in an either or. It's almost, it's on the scale of 10 being the great life and 1 being I'm a failure. Throughout the day and when I'm teaching, I reflect after I've taught whether that was a great class or a terrible class. It's like there's nothing in between. And I don't know, I mean, I assume you not rate, but you evaluate and you assess podcasts. And if you were like me, you'd say, that was a great one. And that one was terrible. There's nothing, there's no 4s and 6s. And so that's a pattern I have. And I also think that way in relationships. I either have a great relationship with Elaine, or I don't have a relationship with him. And that's just one example of a pattern. But I'm interested in the teachers that are the most gifted in my mind are those that are aware of what's going on inside of them so they can focus on other people. They can focus on their students. And go ahead.
The last time I took a class at university, I'm here in Canada, it was Concordia University. It was an elective class because I'm already a business owner and I just took a class for self-education, not for credit. And I was astonished by the amount of students who had their laptops open looking at Facebook or other social media. And I was it was hard for me to believe because I paid real cash for that class because it was for my own
Yeah,
improvement,
yeah,
not for credits. And yes, the waste of time of the professor and the students themselves of not being engaged in this 80 minutes of classes.
yeah. Well, it's what's so interesting in my mind is that there's different ways that we learn. We know basically that humans learn three different ways. One, they learn by putting new content in their head. Another way they learn is by having their assumptions questioned. And the third way they learn is they learn something about themselves. But I think there's I say to myself, how will my students be deep learners? Deep learners. And the students that you have just described are superficial learners. They are there. It is strategic learning. And that is, I am only learning to the extent that it will assist me in an exam or in some kind of evaluation. But they don't say it consciously, but they don't even care if they forget it the day after the exam's over. And so that's why you'll notice Elaine, when you come to Boston and attend a class, the first thing I will do is I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story because I have 90 students who walk into my class who have paid thousands of dollars, and they've all had different experiences that night. They have people in their lives who are dying. They've broken up with the love of their life, or they're in love, or they feel all alone. And what's Tom going to do so that within a minute he has them all there? And I go back and say, what do we use for our children? We use metaphor. We use stories. And so, for example, I just gave a lecture this morning over Zoom about what happens when we lose our way and how do we find it? How do we get back? And the first story I said was as follows. I flew out to visit my mother in Utah, and she was 87, very sharp intellectually. And I would fly out 4 times a year or so to visit her. And one time I'm visiting her, and she looks at me and she says, Tom, do you know that you have looked at your watch on your arm about 8 times and you've only been here an hour? She said, the next time you come to visit me, would you please take off your watch? And so then I'm thinking, not only has my mother taught me something at 88, but what kind of a person have I turned into? Because now, if I'm looking at my watch and thinking, I'm thinking inside my head, how much time do I have to put in so that she will feel like she's been attended to and cared for? And so I've turned into a person that is only focused on my needs. Hers are secondary. And so I have there's in fact, I was thinking about reading just a half a page, if that's okay, Elaine, or
Sure.
not.
Yes, please.
And just to show you the difference in students. And what I did is I asked about 6 or 7 students to write down stream of conscious of what they're thinking about when they walk into my class. Okay? And this is one student. And this is what she reports. This class begins in 45 seconds. I'm going to go through the back entrance today. That way I can avoid making eye contact with Emily. It's not that I dislike her. It just feels awkward because we roomed together last year and now I don't want to talk to her. Ever since Emily's internship in the fashion industry, she's changed. She's not a bad person, but I just don't want to interact with her. Okay, and that all happened within 3 to 4 seconds. And then at 35 seconds, I slide into my seat and prop my name card up in front of me. I look at my right, smile at Andrew, a silent attempt to say good morning. He's on his phone, furiously texting away and missing my gesture completely. And I don't have any plans for tonight. 20 seconds. You know, I'm so selfish. I'm thinking about my plans, and I still haven't called my grandfather since he had a minor stroke last week. Dad's been reminding me every day. Am I really too busy to call my grandfather? And so then it gets to 10 seconds. Then it gets to 0 seconds when Professor DeLong starts the class. So you've got 90 of those stories. 90. And Tom, I'm using the story of my mother as an example of how in a minute do I tell a story where they are all there and you can hear a pin drop. And all they care about is the experience and the feeling they're having in Tom's class.
You know, there are a lot of similarities between your job and the craft of public speaking, which is this practically, well, what you're doing is doing a public speech or 90-minute speech, and you are looking for that interaction, except that you ask questions and have more contact with your audience. Let me ask you, well, education is changing by the minute, especially this last year. You are a teacher at an elite school, Harvard University. From your perspective, what's the future of education? Is it going to be a hybrid model? Are people going to go back to campuses after this pandemic thing is over? Is Harvard University going to expand the amount of students they accept? Because this is one of the highest critique that we hear about Harvard University, that is just like an elite school which restricts the admission of many people. I know it's a lot of there are a lot of questions there, so whatever, feel free to answer whatever you want.
I think it's all up in the air. I think that we will always want students to come to campus so that they have a specific experience, but maybe they take a portion of the class on Zoom, but that will also depend on the quality of the teaching. But I think, for example, last year, 2 years ago, we may have had 12,000 executives come to Harvard Business School for executive programs, and that went to 0. Now the question is what will those companies do? Will they send executives back? And I think time will tell. And also, what will also tell is the outcome of the vaccine. Because at an international school, for example, it's all fine if all Americans have the vaccine, but what about folks from Chile? What about folks from India? The word on the street now is it's going to take 5 years to vaccinate the Indian population. We have 100 students that are from India. What are we going to do around that? So there's all of these kinds of things that are in many respects up in the air. But I think, but one of the things I have learned in talking about this book that's been the biggest surprise on one is, yes, that I've shared my insecurities. But I interviewed so many CEOs. And out of hundreds of interviews, Elaine, only 5 ever described their role as a CEO as a teacher. And that is frightening. Because in my mind, that's all a leader is. But they don't see themselves as that. They see themselves as administrators and change agents and all these things. But I think that's one of the reasons that so many of our organizations are so dysfunctional, is because the CEO she or he has turned inward to say, what are my needs? What's the lifestyle I want to live? And yes, I'm going to have to serve these people, but they're not putting the needs of their employees first, because that's what teachers do. I mean, you can imagine you can imagine, and you've had an experience about someone who communicates to you that you're not learning something, and you start to feel self-conscious, or you start to feel stupid, and 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 I think we shut people down psychologically and emotionally all the time because we communicate that there's something that we need to be doing there right then rather than talking to Elaine or Tom or someone else. And so I have deep worries about organizations because CEOs are unwilling to put in the time. They believe they can take shortcuts with people and simply focus on the numbers. And I'm arguing that leading is teaching, and teaching is leading because Elaine, I've got a model for every student there about what is it to be a manager and how do you treat people. And my goal, Elaine, is that I want every student who becomes a manager to think about how each person is at their best. How is that person at their best? And then how can I help that person? And I don't think CEOs are thinking that at all.
But let me push you back in this subject. Aren't CEOs in a search to look for people who are smarter than they are? This is
I know. Well, I don't think they do that. I think they look for people that are just like them.
I see.
They want many whoever's. So Elaine wants to hang out with people who tell you that agree with you and don't push back. And I ask CEOs, how much of your time do you spend with people who make you uncomfortable? My research says that 90% of the time CEOs are spending time with people who are star performers just like them. Because they want to have mirrors, they want to have reflections back to them.
Wow. Wow. Well, can I ask you one more time about Harvard University restricting the
Oh,
amount of students that
yeah.
you guys have, and how much is it in a name? If I go to another university, let's say I go to Concordia University here in Montreal versus Harvard University where you are, if I feel like I got a good education, is how much is the name Harvard of value to in the rest of my professional life?
Unfortunately, it has a value, but that's society's problem. Society that, as we know it now, is an elitist society. It's elitist. It is not interested in fairness. It's not interested in equality, and and so those organizations that are seen at the top, um, the people in them, like Tom, I'm the one that needs to say and talk about how we can make some changes and the quality of teaching. I, I I'll put McGill University up against Harvard any day. I don't know Concordia as well. You have a great business school at the University of Western Ontario. It's a great business school. University of Toronto is a great university. I I will put University of Toronto up against Harvard University in most every area and in the business. They have a great business school. But how many years has it taken Harvard to create a limit in terms of supply demand? We're 300 years old. We've been working on that on the brand of Harvard, and it's not. It's and again, we're human, and we're impressed with status.
Right.
We're impressed with hierarchy. We're impressed with people who we think are impressive, and that's an unfortunate.
When I think of Harvard, I think of the company De Beers, who
Oh,
creates this brand, and people pay extra to have a De Beers diamond.
Yeah.
Although,
Well, but you need to, yeah, you need to know though that we don't charge. We charge about I assume what 100 universities charge. So we aren't actually we aren't the most expensive, but we could be. That's what's unfortunate.
wow, this is an amazing conversation. As I told you, this is the first time I have a conversation about the art of teaching,
Mm,
and I'm sure my listeners will be happy to read your book. So I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can students follow you? I
yeah,
mean, listeners
yeah,
follow you.
I know, I know. They can get it on Amazon, but it's called Teaching by Heart: One Professor's Journey to Inspire. One Professor's Journey to Inspire. It's a Harvard Business Review. You can write Harvard Business Review, or it's on Amazon, and I think it's a intriguing read in that you get the inside story about what is actually happening inside of me and at the Harvard Business School.
Yeah, this is the first time I hear or read that inside story. Thank you so much for sharing it, and thank you so much for your time.
My privilege.